Welcome to another episode of Bible Talk, the place where we connect the Bible and everyday life. Now, today's guest, Nancy Hicks, she is taking us on a journey. This is a harder episode. Nancy, I'll let her tell the longer version of her story, but Nancy and her husband lost one of their two boys to cancer a couple years ago. It was diagnosed 4 years ago. It's been a journey, and we dive into how do we process grief and loss and struggle. What are the unhealthy ways to do that? What are some healthy ways to do that? What does that journey look like? And we end with a look at what can we do to help other people when a good friend has a loss, when it's not us, but when we're the one walking alongside others. So join me. This is not one of the easier Bible Talk episodes, but I think it is massively important. So you're really going to benefit from my conversation with Nancy Hicks. Nancy Hicks, thank you so much for coming on Bible Talk. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell everybody who may not have heard of you. I know you've been speaking, you've been writing, you've been on TV, you've done a whole lot of different things. But in case someone hasn't run across you, give us the 1 to 2 minute overview of Nancy Hicks.
Nancy Hicks. Well, communication has been my thing all my life. Started on the stage as a professional singer back in Toronto, which is my home, or was my home for many, many years, and moved into television with QVC on the stage as a voice, as a singer. I was a soprano. Musical theater and classical voice. Moved into television with QVC for over a decade. And then I sensed the Lord's calling on my life. Even I've been a leader in the church, Keith, my whole life, preached my first sermon at age 16, but never had done it, vocationally, depending on how you look at that word. And then got my master's in theology and started this ministry, Nancy Hicks Live, about 8 years ago. And now I speak and teach the scriptures, retreats, conferences, lots of media. You're right, radio, television, podcasts, etc. And wrote a book, Meant to Live, and have been honored to have Relevant Magazine and Propel Women feature my articles and things like that. So media, communication, that's my thing. I also love coaching too, which has been a new thing, though I've done it all my life, has been a really new thing we've added to the ministries. So that's me in a nutshell. And a mama. And a woman.
Okay, yeah. There you go. And now you are south of the border, but not south of the border as most people here in the States think of south of the border. South of the border is that you're no longer in Toronto, Canada.
Right. We left the U.S., we left Canada 24 years ago, and we live just outside of Philadelphia. Yeah. So we love it here. And we raised, we raised our two sons here, David and Aaron. And my husband, we've been married we just celebrated our 33rd wedding anniversary.
Nice. So yeah. So you got married right out of middle school then?
Yeah, right out of middle school. Thank you so
much. All right. Well, you and I first met when I interviewed you for the membership that I help host, Hope Speakers, and really on the speaking and stage, all of that content. But then we just connected offline just after that conversation, we're kind of gonna shift gears a little bit, because I know you've walked through a very difficult journey, and as a mama, and so the grief and loss and struggle is such a theme that is common to the experience of women and men, no matter what their age, educational background, economic level, all those kinds of things. And so when it comes to shifting gears to Bible, we're not going to, all the things that you've done, all the TV and the stage and the singing. I mean, I love talking to you about that, and that's why we had you on Hope Speaker. But here on Bible Talk, I wanted to unpack that. When you said that you were willing to unpack that, I just thought that would be really helpful to have people hear your journey a little bit, and then kind of how you've processed it, what God's done with you in it, and in you and through you, and how His Word has played into that, and just all things kind of surrounding grief and diving in. So first of all, even before we dive into that, I want to just sincerely thank you for being willing to come on in a public forum like this with somebody that you don't know well, that and dive into something that I think is going to be hard, but really, really helpful for the people that are watching. So thank you for being willing to come.
My honor, honestly. I mean, it's the story that God has entrusted to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really believe in the power of the testimony. I
Mm-hmm.
actually believe that. So
Yeah.
it is my honor to share as honestly and in as raw a manner as possible.
Okay.
So
Well, then rather than me teeing up with a question or
yeah,
something, how about I just open up with, you take this where you want to take it with your testimony and what the journey is that you've recently walked through.
sure. It's interesting, because we just wrap up, depending on when you air this, just march into September and Labor Day, et cetera. And everyone's sort of like full speed ahead. Here we go. And the texts start coming in and the emails start coming in. And maybe that's your listeners' experience as well. That is my experience, even though for the last 3 months I was put on medical rest by three of medical professionals that are caring for me right now. And why I'm being cared for and why I was put on rest is because 2 years ago, well, actually 4 years ago, our older son, David, um, this brilliant, incredible, gorgeous follower of Christ, who was at graduate school at Harvard doing a double major in public policy and law. He had moved back from China. He was in Shanghai working for the US Chamber of Commerce. And came back to go to Harvard to go into international trade law or US-China relations. And while he was studying at Harvard, this very healthy son who was an incredible cook, ate clean, was a runner, never was into, abusing alcohol or any drugs, clean. At age 26, he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And so my husband and I happened to be together the day he called. He had gone in for what they thought would be an uneventful colonoscopy. He'd had some blood in his stool, and instead they discovered this tumor. And we were told, my husband and I quickly got up to Boston, Cambridge, and we were told by the oncologist up there, we were in excellent hands, but we were told that we'd get it. We had all kinds of options at our disposal. And in fact, the oncologist uttered the words, David, I'll die before you do. We'll get it. But after 2 years of, alternative medicine, chemotherapy, scans, surgeries, in a windowless room at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, because COVID happened the second year of David's treatments. And Harvard was actually the first university to close, and all the internationals just got, sent back to their own homes and countries. David hadn't lived at home for 8 years, and now he's living at home and with us the last year of his life, but in a windowless room at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. My husband was with David, and David said to his oncologist here, nothing's working. What's our plan B? And the oncologist looked at David and my husband and just said, there is no plan B. We've exhausted our options. It's hospice. And so Keith, they put my son David on hospice, my incredible son with his whole future ahead of him. And within 3 weeks, he passed away. We were with him. And that, obviously there's grieving that happens when your 26-year-old is diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. But as prayerful people as followers of Christ. There was all kinds of prayer and prophecy, and by faith, uh, the journey was a very faithful journey, which when I say that word, it conjures up all kinds of things. I just preached at a church in the area a couple of Sundays ago, and I talked about the word being faithful. What does that mean? So I'm cognizant that it can mean all kinds of things to people. But after all of that, since David's passing, May 1st, 2021, I have been walking the unbelievable journey of grief as a mother, with God, being held by God, and it has been a journey like no other. And I just want to say, because I know we'll delve into what that looks like, et cetera, but I simply want to say that I have done the work of grief. I have not circumvented the work. I have not avoided the work. I have not denied that it's necessary work. I have entered in fully to the work, and it is messy, hard work. And I do believe, though, that when God allows, depending again on your theology, something like this to happen, you don't just sort of quickly get over it like a speed bump. Let me just kind of get back up to speed. If you're wise, I believe that God is beckoning to us to know Him and to be changed in radical ways. So that's where I am. I'm going to pause there so that you can go ahead with any questions, because of course there's so much in this.
Yeah, as a father of 3 myself, I just can only imagine. And so as we dive into what that work looks like, maybe tell us what you mean, so that we're all on the same vernacular. What do you mean by the work of grief? And then you can go right into what did that then look like for you? And maybe that's a better way to answer it, is just what does that work look like when you talk about the work of grief?
Right. So I think largely, especially in the West, Keith, and I will say this, what I've noticed is especially Christians, or especially, and when I say the West, immediately we think money. Because, I mean, if you make like $100,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of the entire globe.
Right.
You're wealthy. You're among the wealthy. And a lot of that, of course, not only, but is found in the West. If you have money, if you have education, if you are a Christian, I've sort of discovered that those are the people that think that grief is like, we got to get away from that. That's not something we need to necessarily address, or maybe have access to information about how best to enter into that. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. But the work of grief is I believe, setting aside the necessary time to feel, to think, to engage your entire body in what comes out of the feeling and the thinking, to wrestle with God. We are told to, the Shema in the scriptures, love the Lord your God. We hear it in Deuteronomy, and of course in Exodus. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I don't know how to love God with all of that if I then, chop off the sorrow part, and the suffering and the grief. So entering into the realities of the brokenness of the world when they're presented to us, or some people enter into them, whether or not they're presented, they will move toward those things. But I think especially when they're thrown in your lap, like this has been to us. I've been in grief I was in grief counseling weekly for 14 months. My husband Cam and I have been in extensive marriage counseling over the last 2 years, actually more than that, 2.5. Because it takes a it takes a real toll on your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing very well. Cam and I have been for the last few months. We have an amazing marriage counselor. I am now in personal counseling because I said to the woman, I need to work out my relationship with God. That's what I want to work on with you. So I've done that kind of intensive work, and then the work of silence and just the space to, as I said in my very first point, to feel and to think and to not feel or think anything and just sit. And so that is the work. And then there are more points that I'm sure will come up in our discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've the mind, the marriage, the emotions, the silence, all of that. What have you learned either from your early initial responses or from the ways you've seen other people as you've been in grief counseling, if other people who have experienced there are many ways to do that work and process that work. I've said many times there are many right ways to grieve. There's not just one right way to grieve, but there are definitely some clear wrong ones. and I'm just wondering for somebody, somebody's are in the process right now that's watching this is in the process of walking through grief. Some people are watching this and need to be prepared for something that's going to happen 3 months or 3 years from now.
Yes.
What have you learned about some ways not to grieve? What would you learn are some processes not to take?
Well, I want to say this, and I'll make sure I give you the links, Keith, for your viewers, for your audience, because I have 2 free resources on my website, nancyhickslive.com, downloads for those who are grieving. And again, when I'm talking grieving, I'm talking the loss of a child, but it could be the loss of a job. It could be that's specific to loss of a loved one, but it could be loss of anything, a marriage, the church, whatever. What as the one who is grieving and as the one who walks alongside one who is grieving. So there are 2 free resources. I'll make sure you get those. But I would say what not to do. I would say, let me think about this, because I want to say what to do, but what not to do for sure is to act like it didn't happen or it doesn't matter. Don't do that. Acting like grief actually is love poured out. Sorrow and love flow mingled down like at the cross of Christ. And it says when I survey the wondrous cross, sorrow and love flow mingled down. That is worship. And so do not avoid the very sacred invitation to face reality, to face truth, because truth, again, is not just God. God doesn't just give truth, speak truth. He gives himself. Jesus Christ is truth, capital T. So when you are facing reality, facing what you feel, facing what you thought God was like, and you're facing these things, you are facing God. So don't avoid that. Don't skip over. There are different pieces and parts of grief, and they don't move in a linear fashion. It's like a jungle gym. They move. There's depression, not clinical depression, but depression, sadness. There's anger. We could talk a whole episode just on anger.
Right.
There's denial. So there are different aspects of the grief journey. So I would say, do not avoid it. Do not miss God by trying to make it something it's not. I'm going to say that is my number one thing. Face and acknowledge this mattered. This is painful. And I will say also, do not let people, we always told our boys, David and Aaron, this their whole lives, do not let people be reckless with your heart. And don't you be reckless with other people's hearts. And it's very easy when your heart is literally is wrecked.
Mm-hmm.
When your heart is wrecked by something like the loss of a child, it is very easy for people's mishandling of you and of the messy situation to hurt you further. So I will say, don't let people be reckless with your heart, and don't you be reckless with your heart if you are the one suffering. This is an invitation to know God. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I've walked with Jesus Christ my entire life. My mother came to faith in Christ when I led her as an 18-month-old. She saw me come alive and followed me to church and learned of God's love to her through me. And I have loved and followed Christ, honestly, Keith, my whole life. And intimacy and the real relationship with God has been so like centerpiece of my life. So for me to now have to face God, I'll be the first one to tell you, I've told God multiple times, I didn't want to know you like this. I didn't want to know you like this. I wanted to know you like in amazing ways, but I didn't take this into account. Okay, over to you.
No, I mean, yeah, that's one of the reasons I want to have this conversation with you. I knew that you would not stay on the surface, and I appreciate it. So then, what did that work then look like? What would you recommend? I mean, I know you can't put a timeline on it, but if we're talking about the kind of initial days of grief, I mean, if somebody they lost a job unexpectedly, they lost a child, their spouse walked out, there's something major that has happened, how would you encourage, now knowing what you know, learning what you've learned, walking through now for these last 2+ years, what would you can say phase one is the first 24 hours or the first week or the first month, but that those early days afterwards, what would you recommend somebody do to start grieving in a healthy way?
Well, the facts are, and I actually did take a graduate course on grief because the ministry, Nancy Hicks Live, has done some work on grief, and I've been having these conversations, these interviews, and so I wanted to be a little more versed, not just as a woman who's experienced it very deeply, but also as from a cognitive standpoint and a clinical standpoint. But I will tell you that for the first little while, you are so numb. You are so numb for the first and in shock. So, and that can go for months. You're still, I mean, that first year, that's not the heart. That's not, I mean, that you move through that year, giving yourself space and grace. I could barely lift a coffee mug. And I am an optimistic, like I move my hiney. I'm a workhorse. I am high energy, optimistic go-getter. I couldn't brisk walk for months. At times I'd lift a coffee mug and go, this is too heavy. Like my energy was sapped. But also there's this whole, like you're just in shock and denial and disbelief. And may I read a passage that I've used a few times? I'm just going to read from Lamentations, because in the scriptures, all throughout the scriptures, we see so many passages that are not just describing, not just descriptive language of how to grieve, but actually prescribing to the people of God. You must. Otherwise, you're living in la la land. You're not living with your feet, as Jesus did, in the dirt and dust of the earth, and with his heart tethered to heaven and to his Father and the Spirit. And so Lamentations chapter 3, which happens at the time of the Babylonian siege of the city of God, Jerusalem. Um, the author of Lamentations writes this poem and says in at verse 17, I'll just read a little bit. I have been, okay, so listen to his lament. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone and all I had hoped from the Lord. Sometimes, if we say things like that, people want to correct us so quickly. I'm like, shut up. I'm doing business with God. And I really have said to people, you're on holy ground right now. Holy ground. I remember my affliction and the wandering, the bitterness and the gall. That's very descriptive language. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Much of Lamentations is that kind of very descriptive, rent the garment sort of language. And so that was what my journey looked like. I remember wandering around my kitchen, saying to God, how could you, Abba? With a very, very sotto voce, barely a voice, like a whisper, like just, how could you, Abba? How could you? I was shocked that God would have allowed, even though I'd known of the atrocities. I'm not an idiot. I live on the earth. You hear of the atrocities, you know of the atrocities. We speak and teach on these kinds of things, but to then have it actually personal, it just shook me to the core. How could you, Abba? And so there was a ton of engaging my body in like wailing and weeping and avoiding my prayer chair. Because where I had sat and read the scriptures morning by morning for decades, I couldn't even go near it, Keith. I couldn't. I was like, I still feel gun shy of God. I told my counselor this week, I sometimes sort of do this. I reach out a little bit and sense God. But for the most part, I don't feel a lot. And I know God is holding me and carrying me, but the woman who sits in her chair, does the dutiful thing, is the responsible one, my prayer life looks very different right now. And it's real, but it is not what it once was. It's not the same. And I think it's likely even more powerful, but what do I know about that in the spiritual realm? But it's different for sure. So that's a little bit of what it looked like.
Yeah. So shifting gears before we wrap up, I'd love some words of wisdom from you on, as you've walked through this, and as some people have come and you have advice of don't let somebody mishandle your heart and don't mishandle your own. When you think of the people that have been the most helpful and the people that have not been helpful, and we've talked about what somebody could do when they experience that tragedy or loss or grief. What about when somebody we know does? What about when our best friend loses their child or loses their job or loses their spouse? How would you encourage us to be gentle with the heart while helping them and encouraging them? Let's kind of flip the table as you think of people that have been helpful to you.
Great question.
How would you do that?
I love that. Yeah. I am so full of gratitude for the select few, and then who are in the inner circle with us. Our senior pastor is one of those people. He and his wife are among our closest friends. And I'm thinking immediately of the 4 couples that are dear, dear, dear. And then there are these other people non-Christians and
Mhm.
Christians alike, who have just been able to speak into our lives in tremendous ways. And I think it all comes back to the one thing we know for sure that we can count on God for. One thing: incarnation.
Mhm.
We know we can count on God to be with us, whether we know it or not, whether we feel it or not. I, by faith, believe that God is with me, with us.
Mhm.
And I see it sometimes, and I see that reflected in the people that God has put in our lives, who do not judge the sometimes crazy things. My husband Cam and I say, Cam's been a leader in the church his whole life. The language that has come out of our mouths, sometimes we just can't find better words, to be honest. And they have not judged, they've not critiqued, they've not tried to teach us. When someone who is grieving asks your opinion, then give it. Otherwise, shut up. They're not wanting another. They already know. It's not for lack of theology, for the most part. It's now some people it is, right? They don't, but even if their theology is all up in the air and a mess, let it be. They're sorting it out.
Right.
They're sorting it out. And so I think that's the one thing God offers us is incarnation. We say, no, he promises us peace. Yes, he's the Prince of Peace. No, Nancy, he offers us life, right? Eternal life is God, unending life. It's him. No, but he offers us, light and truth and, all these great things and love. That's him. When you are looking for those things, you're looking for God. It's him. He offers us himself. It's all in him. And so it's the incarnation is what we get from God in these times of great loss and suffering. And again, whether you feel it or not.
Right.
And incarnation is the best thing you can give the person who is suffering. Don't judge them. Don't critique them. Don't offer them things that you think they need. Offer them yourself if you're able. And again, I will say, if you're not in the inner circle with them, a gentle offering, or I'll tell you, people who dropped things off at our home at the door and then went away. I mean, I am still full of gratitude for, again, non-Christians and Christians have done a beautiful job just being with us, crying with us, listening, or just sitting in silence with us. But don't try to press in to be in that, because then you can easily make it about you. It's not about you.
For sure.
It's
Oh,
their journey.
yeah, that is so important. And I, as you're talking through that, I'm reminded of a friend of mine named Sarah, who wrote a book called Alongside, that's about kind of her own struggle and her own grief, and then helping other people with grief. And she talks very much similar to you, of you've got the inner circle of people, and then you've got kind of the people that are of that next tier, if you will, and you've got the people that are outside that circle and just kind of know who you are. And if you're in that outside circle, then tell them that you're sorry, that you'll be praying for them, and don't try to do much else. And if you're in that middle kind of tier, if you will, that she said, I'd be interested to get your opinion on this. Her thought, or her kind of what she writes about, is unless you're on the very inner circle, you're one of those 4 couples who you know that you can say, what do you need? And they're going to tell you what they need. That if
Yeah.
you're in that middle tier, don't just ask them what they need. If you want to, if you're going to offer something, then offer something specific. Hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Is there anything I can pick up for you?
Yeah.
Make it an easy that they could either say yes, that would be great. But when somebody who's not walking the daily, minute by minute, hour by hour journey with them says, what do you need? The answer is all from the person who's grieving. The answer is always going to be, oh, nothing right now. I'm fine.
I need my kid back. That's what I need.
Right.
Can you do that? Can you
Right.
make that happen?
Right.
That's what I need most, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's so easy to make it about us.
Mhm.
We want them to get it, you know, feel better. And what can I do to make you feel better? You can't do anything to make the person feel better. You can't. So acknowledge that you can't make them feel better. My son is gone from the earth. Even people saying he's in heaven. Don't do that.
Right.
Because I want to say, well, how would you like for your child to go to heaven right now? Would
Right.
you be happier with that too?
Right. Right.
So
I've,
don't,
I've,
don't, right?
I've said many times that just because something is true does not believe it's helpful.
Right. You can be right and
Yeah.
wrong at the same time.
Right.
I know. So many
Ah,
things to discuss.
yeah, so many. So thank
Yeah.
you so much,
Oh,
Nancy. I so appreciate you walking this journey and allowing us for these 30 minutes or so to walk this journey with you to get some insight into that, because everybody that is watching this is somebody who has either walked the journey of grief, is currently walking the journey of grief, or will at some point in their life
yes.
experience grief. And to do that in ways that are real and authentic and God honoring and
Yes.
all of that. I mean, the idea of the incarnation being central is so helpful and so beautiful. And so, thank you for allowing us to walk alongside you in this,
Thank you, Keith.
or
Thanks for
maybe more accurately, to have you walk alongside us. So,
well.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. My honor.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this one up. Thank you for being on. Everybody watching this, we will, if you want to connect with Nancy, I want to definitely point. So again, go to Nancy Hicks Live. The resources that she specifically mentioned, I will link to those in the description of this, but you can connect with her. Nancy Hicks Live, both on the website as well as Facebook, Instagram. I hope people do and hear more of your journey as well. So thanks again, Nancy. I really appreciate this.
You're most welcome.
All right, everyone. We will see you on the next episode of Bible Talk. Have a good one.